What if everything you thought you knew about anger, happiness, or fear was completely wrong?
Yeah, I mean, not just a little bit wrong, but fundamentally mistaken.
Exactly. We're talking about a whole new way of thinking about how your brain creates your deepest feelings.
It reminds me of that old riddle, the one about the tree falling in the forest.
Oh, right. If no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound?
Exactly. And most people just say, well, of course it does. But scientifically speaking, sound isn't just air pressure waves. It's a perception. It's constructed in a brain.
Okay.
And this particular book we've been digging into, it asks a really similar profound question about our emotions. Are they these like objective things out there, universal things just waiting to be triggered?
Or are they something we actively create inside ourselves?
Precisely. That's the core question.
And that philosophical riddle, it turns out, has everything to do with how you feel emotions. This deep dive is all about unpacking a really fascinating new perspective. It's from this groundbreaking work by Lisa Feldman Barrett on the science of emotion.
That's right. This book, it introduces a theory called constructed emotion.
Constructed emotion.
And it offers a radically different answer to some of the most basic questions we ask about ourselves. Like, what are emotions, really? Where do they actually come from?
So it pushes back against that standard idea, the one where emotions are just automatic, universal reactions.
It completely challenges it. The
Yeah.
idea that something happens and boom, you just feel angry or sad in a pre-programmed way.
Our mission today, then, is to walk you through the main arguments from this title. We want to break down the key ideas, the concepts that make this new theory tick.
And maybe most importantly, talk about what this cutting-edge understanding means for you. How can knowing this science actually change how you see yourself or how you interact with others or even navigate your own feelings?
Let's dive in.
Okay.
So, to really get why this new idea is such a big deal, we first need to understand what it's up against. The conventional wisdom, Lisa Feldman Barrett calls this the classical view of emotion.
Right, the classical view. And it's basically the common sense belief most of us grew up with. It's been baked into Western thinking for, gosh, centuries.
It's everywhere, isn't it? Philosophy, psychology.
Oh, absolutely. Even our legal system, how we interpret Darwin. It's all been influenced by this idea. The classical view assumes that emotions think happiness, anger, fear are universal. They're innate, hardwired.
And they're triggered automatically by stuff in the world.
Exactly. Something happens,
Yeah.
and it flips a switch.
So the idea is like you see something scary, maybe a snake on a trail,
Right.
and bam! There's supposed to be this dedicated fear circuit in your brain that just lights up instantly.
And that circuit is then supposed to trigger a very specific universal set of bodily reactions.
Your heart races in a particular pattern. Your breathing changes just so, and your face twists into the universal fear expression. Wide eyes, mouth open.
The whole package. It assumes every emotion has its own distinct, measurable fingerprint. A specific pattern in the brain and the body that's the same for everyone, everywhere.
But the problem this work highlights is, that when scientists actually look for those fingerprints, objectively.
They don't really find them.
Yeah.
Not consistently.
And this is where the book lays out some really compelling evidence that just doesn't fit with that classical view. Let's start with the face, the idea of distinct facial fingerprints.
Okay. It's definitely true that people all over the world are pretty good at matching emotion words like angry or sad to those posed, exaggerated faces you see in photos, like actors making a face.
Right, we see those in psych studies all the time.
But when you use objective tools, like facial electromyography, to measure the actual muscle movements on someone's face when they're genuinely feeling an emotion in real life,
It doesn't match the stereotype.
not reliably, no.
Yeah.
That figure 1-5 in the book is really interesting. It shows actors posing anger consistently make a scowl. But someone is actually feeling angry. Their facial movements could be anything. Maybe a scowl, maybe a calm expression, maybe something else entirely, or maybe not much change at all. The variability is huge.
And it's not just adults, right?
Right.
What about babies? If expressions were truly innate, babies should show them clearly.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
You'd expect infants, before they've learned social display rules or language, to show really clear, distinct facial patterns for different emotions.
Like a specific fear face when startled or an anger face when frustrated.
Exactly. But researchers like Lina Camras and Harriet Oster, they use this incredibly detailed system called FACS, the Facial Action Coding System, to measure infants' tiny facial muscle movements. They put babies in situations designed to provoke fear, like with the startling toy gorilla.
A growling gorilla toy.
Yeah. Or situations meant to provoke anger, like gently restraining their arm. And what they found was, well, surprising.
What was it?
The range of facial movements the babies made in the fear situation looked remarkably similar to the range of movements in the anger situation. There wasn't a consistent, distinct fear face pattern that was clearly separate from an anger face pattern.
Wow. That really goes against intuition, doesn't it? Because we feel like we see emotions in faces constantly. We read people instantly.
We absolutely have that strong subjective experience, but this book suggests that what we think we're seeing, that objective signal broadcast from the face, might not be quite right. Instead, it might be our own brain jumping in.
Our brain is interpreting.
Yes, using its own internal knowledge, its concepts, the context. It's actively categorizing those facial movements and the whole situation as, say, an instance of sadness or joy. It's not just passive detection.
Okay, what about that idea, the facial feedback hypothesis? If you force a smile, you actually start to feel happier. Doesn't that support a physical fingerprint?
The book does mention that hypothesis, the idea that posing a face might trigger some associated bodily feelings. But it's careful to point out this is actually pretty controversial in the scientific community.
It's not settled science.
Far from it. There's a lot of disagreement about whether just making a face can really conjure up a full-blown, complex emotional experience, or if it just causes maybe a slight shift in your general feeling, your affect.
Okay, so the evidence for distinct facial fingerprints seems shaky. What about inside? In the brain and the body, are there unique circuits or patterns there?
Again, when you look at the decades of research, the evidence just doesn't stack up for the classical view. Neuroimaging studies, for instance, haven't reliably found distinct brain circuits that light up only for anger or only for sadness every single time someone feels that way.
So there's no anger center or sadness switch in the brain?
Doesn't seem so. The brain is much more complex and interconnected than that.
But hang on, what about the amygdala? Isn't that always called the fear center? That sounds pretty specific.
Yes, the amygdala. That's a classic example of how the older view framed things. The book brings up the really fascinating case of SM. This is a woman who has damage to her amygdala because of a rare genetic condition. Now, if the amygdala was purely the fear center, you'd expect her to be completely incapable of feeling or recognizing fear.
Right. Makes sense.
But it wasn't that simple. She did have trouble identifying those wide-eyed, posed fear faces in photos. And she didn't report feeling strong fear in typical fear-inducing situations, horror movies, snakes, haunted houses, things like that. But she experienced and perceived other emotions perfectly normally. And importantly, other studies show the amygdala is involved in lots of things, not just processing threat. It's involved when we encounter anything novel or uncertain that requires us to learn more. It's more like a central hub in a larger network. So the SM case, along with broader brain imaging, really argues against the idea that fear lives solely in the amygdala.
Okay, so not one specific brain spot. What about the body's response? I always thought, anger means high heart rate, sweaty palms, sadness means slow breathing, low energy. Isn't that consistent?
Well, just like with the facial expressions, variability is the rule, not the exception, for body responses too. Think about anger. Your heart rate might go up if you're yelling or getting ready for a confrontation.
Sure.
But what if you're just sitting there, quietly simmering with resentment? Your heart rate might actually decrease, or it might not change much at all. You might scowl, or you might stand perfectly still, maybe even laugh bitterly. The body's response is incredibly flexible. It depends entirely on what action your brain is preparing you for in that specific moment, in that specific context.
So the body's getting ready for action, but the action could be very different depending on the situation.
Exactly. And the book explains this through the brain's architecture. It's built for variation, and it uses something called degeneracy.
Degeneracy, that sounds negative.
It does, doesn't it? But in neuroscience, degeneracy is actually a good thing. It's a feature. It just means that many different combinations of neurons or brain regions can produce the same outcome.
Like multiple roads leading to the same city?
Perfect analogy. Or think of a single tool that can be used for many different jobs. Conversely, single neurons or regions can participate in creating many different outcomes or experiences. Having fixed, dedicated neural fingerprints for each emotion, like one specific circuit only for fear, would actually be super inefficient and inflexible. especially given how incredibly diverse human environments and our possible reactions are. Your brain needs to be adaptable.
Okay. Okay, so no consistent brain circuits, no consistent body patterns, no consistent facial expressions. What about the idea that emotions are universal across cultures, that everyone understands anger or happiness the same way?
That's another really big pillar of the classical view that gets challenged. The book points out that some of the most famous cross-cultural studies, the ones from the 1960s, that seem to provide strong proof for universality. Well, they often use methods that might have nudged participants toward the right answer.
How so?
For example, they'd show people a posed face, like a scowl, and then give them a short, multiple-choice list of emotion words, maybe happy, sad, angry, fearful.
Ah, so they were basically giving them the concepts right there on the page.
Precisely. They were providing the potential categories beforehand. It makes it much easier to get agreement. But studies that used a different method called free labeling.
Where people just describe what they see without a list.
Exactly. Those studies, especially when they involved people from cultures with very different languages and concepts, showed much less evidence for universality. People described the faces or feelings in ways that didn't always map neatly onto Western emotion categories. But interestingly, those free labeling studies often got less attention or weren't published in the big journals.
And the book argues that these emotion concepts aren't just helpful for labeling. They might actually be necessary for us to even perceive an emotion in the first place, even in a face that seems obvious.
Yes, this is a really crucial point. Experiments have shown that if you reduce people's access to their emotion concepts, maybe by distracting them, removing the word lists, using photos without context, or studying very young kids who haven't fully learned concepts like disappointment or remorse, their ability to recognize those supposedly universal emotions in posed faces goes down significantly.
So even recognizing a smile as happiness isn't automatic.
Well, infants, for example, can definitely distinguish a smiling face from a frowning one, but objective measures suggest they might be tuning into simpler physical features, like the presence of visible teeth, rather than understanding the complex abstract concept of happiness that adults associate with a smile.
This really drives home the idea that seeing isn't just believing. Our perception isn't passive. It's our brain actively constructing meaning using what it already knows or expects.
Exactly right. The book uses this wonderful analogy, seeing stripes in a rainbow. The actual light spectrum is a smooth, continuous gradient of wavelengths. There are no sharp lines out there in the physics of light, but our brain, influenced by our culture and the color words we learn in our language.
Like red, orange, yellow.
Right. It uses those concepts to carve up that continuous spectrum. It categorizes the wavelengths into distinct bands, creating the perception of stripes. Figure 5.1 in the book shows this really clearly.
So the stripes are a construction of our perception based on our concepts.
Essentially, yes. And the argument is that our brain does something very similar with the continuous flow of information from inside our bodies, our interoception, and the sensory input from the world. It uses our learned emotion concepts to categorize these complex, often ambiguous streams of sensation into discrete experiences we label sadness, anger, joy, and so on.
Wow. So different cultures might literally carve up the landscape of feeling differently. They might have different emotional colors or different boundaries between feelings.
That's a fantastic way to put it. Just like some languages have fewer basic color words than English, blurring distinctions we see clearly, emotion concepts vary hugely across cultures. The book gives examples like legit in the Philippines, this intense energy tied to specific social situations, or fake-ego among the Ifaluk people, a complex feeling blending compassion, sadness, and love. These don't have neat one-to-one translations into English emotion words.
It makes sense.
And there's a great personal anecdote from the cultural psychologist Batya Mesquita. When she moved from the Netherlands to the U.S., she found the typical American way of expressing happiness like, "I'm doing great," felt culturally specific, almost jarringly different from her Dutch experience. Her own ways of feeling and showing positive emotion sometimes felt, well, inadequate or out of sync in this new cultural context. It shows how our emotion concepts aren't fixed. They're dynamic, learned, and can even change as we adapt to new cultures.
Okay, let's try to sum up this first big piece. The classical view emotions as universal, automatic triggers with distinct fingerprints in the brain, body, and face. It seems like the scientific evidence presented in this work just doesn't really support it when you look closely.
Exactly. It highlights a really acute problem.
Yeah.
Our basic intuitive understanding of our own feelings, how we experience them, how we see them in others. It might be built on a foundation that's, well, fundamentally shaky, according to this newer science.
It's not saying our feelings aren't real.
Oh, absolutely not. The experiences are completely real. The fear is real. The anger is real. The joy is real. But how those experiences get created in our brain and body seems to be radically different from that old trigger and fingerprint story.
Okay, so if emotions aren't these pre-programmed reactions with unique fingerprints, then how are they made? This brings us to the alternative picture presented in the book, the theory of constructed emotion.
Right. So instead of emotions being detected, like finding something that already exists, they are, like the sound of that tree in the forest, actively constructed. Your brain builds them in the moment, on the fly.
How does it do that? What's it using?
Think of your brain less like a simple reaction machine and more like a really skilled chef, as the book suggests. It has these core ingredients.
These ingredients.
Yeah, these correspond to fundamental brain systems, especially a network heavily involved in monitoring your body, the interoceptive network. And then it uses dynamic recipes, which are your concepts, your learned knowledge, to combine these basic ingredients in countless ways.
To create all the different emotional dishes we experience, like happiness, sadness, awe, frustration.
Exactly. And crucially, the ingredients themselves aren't single purpose. They're involved in many, many brain functions, not just emotion.
Okay, so what's the most basic ingredient in this emotional kitchen?
The most fundamental one is something called affect.
Affect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, affect isn't a specific emotion like anger or joy. It's much simpler. It's your basic, ongoing sense of feeling. It's just generally how pleasant or unpleasant you feel and how calm or agitated you are moment to moment.
Like a background feeling tone.
That's a perfect description. Is your fundamental feeling tone always there, simmering beneath the surface of your conscious experience?
And where does that feeling tone, that effect, come from?
It primarily arises from interoception.
Interoception.
Yeah,
That's the brain monitoring the body, right?
exactly. It's your brain's constant process of monitoring and actually predicting the internal state of your body. It's keeping tabs on everything: your heart rate, breathing, body temperature, muscle tension, hormone levels, inflammation markers, gut feelings, all of it. Your brain is continuously getting and anticipating signals about what's happening inside your skin.
And this connects to that concept of the body budget.
Yes, absolutely critical. Your brain isn't just monitoring, it's actively managing your body's resources. Think of it like running a household budget, but for your physiology. You need to manage energy, glucose, salt, water, oxygen, all the biological resources needed to stay alive and well.
So interoception is like the accounting department providing updates on the budget.
Kind of. Interoception provides the constant stream of information, the predictions, and the actual data about this body budget. And affect is like the super simplified bottom-line summary report delivered to your consciousness. Feeling generally good, pleasant, maybe energized, often means your budget is balanced or in surplus, or you're spending resources effectively towards a goal. Feeling generally bad, unpleasant, maybe lethargic, often signals your budget is in deficit, stressed, or maybe resources are being mobilized to deal with a challenge.
So affect is basically our brain's quick summary of how am I doing internally right now.
That's a great way to think about it. And every single thing your brain does, every prediction it makes, every thought, every action, even just simulating possibilities, which the book notes we spend maybe half our waking hours doing, costs energy and impacts this body budget. This internal simulation, this mind wandering, strongly drives our moment-to-moment effect.
And other people can affect our budget too.
Hugely. Holding hands with a partner during stress, for example, can literally reduce the activity in your brain's body budgeting regions. We help regulate each other. Losing someone close can feel physically devastating,
Yeah.
partly because you've lost a key external regulator for your own internal budget.
Wow. Okay, so affect is the body budget report card driven by interoception.
Yeah.
How does the brain use this? What's its main strategy?
The book makes a really strong case that the brain's fundamental operating principle isn't reaction, but prediction. Your brain isn't waiting passively for information to come in from the world or the body. It's constantly proactively anticipating what sensory input it's likely to receive in the very next moment. Based on everything it's learned from your entire life history, combined with the specifics of the current situation.
That's a huge shift in thinking about the brain, not just passive receiver, but active predictor.
It really is. Think about just imagining a red apple. When you do that, your brain isn't just pulling up a file, it's actively simulating the experience. It changes the firing patterns in your visual cortex, essentially predicting what seeing a red apple would be like.
Okay.
Then, when you actually see a real apple, that prior simulation acts as a prediction. If the incoming light signals match the prediction, great. The prediction has successfully accounted for or explained that sensory input.
These predictions aren't just random guesses. They seem to originate from deep within the brain in regions associated with the default mode network, that network that's often active when we're introspecting or mind wandering. And this network is tightly linked with the interoceptive network managing the body budget.
So predictions are like these multisensory guesses based on past experience. Kind of like multisensory summaries, yeah. And this predictive ability is absolutely vital. It helps manage the body budget proactively. Your brain anticipates your body's future needs, like needing more glucose before a strenuous activity, and prepares the body before the need actually arises. This predictive regulation is fundamental for keeping us alive and functioning efficiently.
Okay, so we've got the ingredients, effect, interoception, the body budget status. We've got the brain's main tool, prediction.
How do we get from predicting body states and sensory inputs to actually feeling an emotion like sadness or anger?
That's where the next key process comes in, categorization. And categorization relies heavily on your concepts.
Right, concepts, the learned recipes.
Exactly. So your brain makes predictions. Then actual sensory input arrives from your eyes, ears, skin, and crucially from inside your body via interoception. The brain compares the incoming input to its predictions. Any mismatch is registered as prediction error.
Like, whoa, that wasn't quite what I expected. Precisely. Now, the brain needs to make sense of this raw, often ambiguous sensory input and the prediction error. What does this pattern of signals mean right now? To do that, it uses its vast library of concepts.
And we talked about concepts not being like fixed dictionary definitions.
Right. A concept, in this view, isn't a static thing stored in one place. It's a dynamic collection of instances built up from all your past experiences and knowledge, including everything you've absorbed from your culture and language. Your brain is constantly doing statistical learning, figuring out which sensations, actions, contexts, and goals tend to cluster together.
So a concept like anger isn't one specific pattern, but a whole population of different anger-like instances.
Exactly. Inspired by Darwin's population thinking, anger is a category representing a diverse population of instances that share some functional similarity or goal in certain contexts, constructed from all the times you felt, seen, or heard about anger.
So categorization is the brain taking, say, a thumping heart, maybe tight shoulders, sweaty palms, plus the situation you're in, and matching that whole package to the most relevant concept it has available.
That's the essence of it. If you have those bodily sensations while hiking and you suddenly see a bear, your brain might categorize that entire package, the internal feelings, the sight of the bear, the forest context, using its concept of fear. That categorization process is what gives meaning to those otherwise ambiguous physical sensations in that specific situation. It makes sense of the input. This racing heart means I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And it helps guide your potential actions, like slowly backing away.
It constructs the meaning.
It constructs the meaning, and the experience of the emotion emerges from that construction. The book gives that poignant example of the author feeling sadness while listening to Governor Malloy talk about the Sandy Hook tragedy. It wasn't a sadness circuit firing. Her brain categorized her bodily feelings, the lump in her throat, the ache in her chest, combined with the context or knowledge of the horrific event, her past experiences of grief and loss, using her concept of sadness. The resulting experience felt like the distinct emotion of sadness, but it was the product of this incredibly fast, automatic categorization process unfolding largely outside of conscious awareness.
And these concepts, these recipes we use for construction, they're learned, heavily influenced by our culture and language.
Absolutely crucial point. Babies are like little statistical learning wizards, constantly detecting patterns which sights, sounds, feelings, and actions tend to co-occur. And language plays a massive role here. Words act like labels for concepts, making categorization much more efficient. Words also act as social glue, allowing us to share concepts and build a shared reality.
How do words help infants learn concepts?
Studies show that even just hearing a nonsense word applied consistently to different objects encourages infants to look for deeper similarities between those objects, beyond just how they look. It helps them form more abstract, goal-based concepts. The author's own daughter learning the concept angry is a perfect illustration. She learned the word and the concept by hearing it used across various situations where she was feeling unpleasant and maybe acting out. Her brain gradually built the category angry by linking the word to diverse instances of her own feelings and behaviors and those she observed in others.
Okay, so let's pull these pieces together. Core ingredients: effect, interoception, body budget, core processes. prediction, and categorization, and a huge influence from learned concepts, language, and culture.
That leads us right into the third key idea, which is social reality. Emotions aren't just constructed inside one person's head in isolation. They are profoundly shaped by and also help create our shared social reality.
Social reality, what does that mean exactly?
Social reality refers to things whose existence depends on collective agreement, on shared understanding among people, things that go beyond just physical properties. Money is a classic example. A piece of paper only has value because we all agree it does. National borders are another. Even the lines between trailers in a rainbow, as we discussed. They exist because of shared concepts.
And emotion concepts are part of this social reality.
Very much so. Our shared cultural understanding provides the concepts, the frameworks that our individual brains use to construct emotional experiences. These emotion concepts are like tools provided by our culture.
Tools for what?
Tools for making meaning of our internal state, for prescribing how to behave in certain situations, like how to act appropriately sad at a funeral, for communicating our internal state to others in a way they can understand, and for influencing how others feel and behave.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think back to seeing someone sweating and breathing quickly. If they're wearing gym clothes on a track, you and others around likely categorize it using concepts like exertion or maybe excitement. But if the exact same physical signs are seen in someone standing at a wedding altar in a tuxedo,
You'd probably categorize it as nervousness or anxiety.
exactly. The physical signals might be very similar, but the shared cultural concepts we apply, based on the context, lead to a completely different constructed emotion, both in the person experiencing it and in the observers perceiving it.
And this ties back to that idea of affective realism, right? Our feelings influencing our perception of reality.
Yes, it's all interconnected. Affective realism is the way our current internal feeling state our affect, driven by our body budget subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, shapes how we perceive supposedly objective facts about the world around us.
Like those examples from the book, rating job applicants lower on a rainy day.
Right. Unless your attention is drawn to the weather, you might misattribute your slightly lower mood effect to the applicant themselves. Or the author's example of feeling unwell because of the flu, but misinterpreting those unpleasant bodily sensations affect as feelings of attraction towards a lunch companion. Affective realism means our perception of reality is always, to some degree, filtered through or colored by our current internal state. And this isn't just for emotions, it's fundamental to how our brain constructs our entire experience of the world.
Okay, let's try a quick recap of this theory of constructed emotion. It's a big shift. Emotions aren't detected like finding something. They're actively created by your brain moment by moment.
Right, using core ingredients like affect and interoception, always tracking the body budget.
The brain's main job is prediction, anticipating sensory input.
And it makes sense of that input and any prediction errors by categorizing it all using learned concepts.
Concepts that are shaped by our experience, our language, our culture, our shared social reality.
And crucially, variation is the norm. How you experience or express anger today might be different from tomorrow, and different from how someone else experiences it, because each instance is a unique construction based on that specific context and your state at that moment.
It really is a radical departure from the classical view. It changes the picture from humans as sort of reactive machines.
To seeing us as proactive architects constantly constructing our own experience.
This is genuinely mind-bending science. It changes everything about how we might think about feelings. But what does it actually mean for us, for the listener? How can someone take this understanding of how emotions are made and, use it, apply it in their life?
Yeah, and that's really where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Because this isn't just abstract theory. This new perspective offers a fundamentally different view of what it means to be human. And it comes with implications for agency.
Agency, meaning more control.
Potentially, yes. It suggests you aren't just a passive recipient of emotions that wash over you. You are an active architect of your experience. And that implies you might have more influence, more potential leverage over your emotional life than the classical view ever allowed for.
Okay, let's unpack that. If my brain is constructing my emotions using predictions and concepts, can I just decide to feel differently? Can I consciously change an emotion as it's happening?
Well, probably not instantly like flipping a switch. So much of this construction process happens incredibly fast, automatically, beneath conscious awareness. You can't just will yourself out of feeling anxious in the moment. However,
But
you absolutely can take steps over time to influence your future emotional constructions. You can work on changing the ingredients of the recipes your brain uses.
Well, it's a practical way to do that.
One of the most powerful applications discussed in the book is developing and increasing your emotional granularity.
Emotional granularity. Sounds technical, but what is it?
Think of it simply as having a richer, more precise vocabulary and conceptual toolkit for your emotional experiences. Instead of just lumping everything unpleasant under bad or stressed or angry, someone with high emotional granularity can make finer distinctions.
So instead of just angry, they can recognize if they're feeling, say, aggravated or irritated, frustrated, indignant, resentful, maybe even vengeful.
Exactly. It's like being an emotion expert, or as you said earlier, an emotions sommelier. You have a more nuanced palette. Having this richer set of concepts allows your brain to categorize your internal state and the surrounding situation with much greater precision and accuracy.
And why is that helpful? Is it just about knowing more words?
Oh, it's much more than just vocabulary, though that's part of it. The book highlights real benefits linked to higher emotional granularity. People who can pinpoint their feelings more precisely tend to be better at managing them. They're less likely to get overwhelmed by general unpleasantness or resort to unhelpful coping mechanisms like excessive drinking or aggression.
Better emotion regulation. Makes sense.
Yes, and there's even research hinting at links to better physical health outcomes. Possibly because being better at managing the ups and downs of affect helps regulate the body budget more effectively, which might, in turn, help manage chronic stress and inflammation.
Okay, so how does someone actually increase their emotional granularity? Do I just read a thesaurus?
Huh, that might help a bit, but it's more active than that. Yes, consciously learn new emotion words, especially nuanced ones. Pay attention to their subtle differences in meaning, but then critically practice using them. Try to label your own feelings more specifically throughout the day.
So instead of just saying, I feel bad, try to pinpoint. Is it disappointment? Is it fatigue? Is it anxiety about something specific?
Exactly. And pay close attention to the context, what's happening around you. And importantly, pay attention to the physical sensations inside your body, that interoceptive information. What does frustration actually feel like physically for you compared to disappointment? Making those connections helps build richer concepts.
The book also mentions something about recategorizing effect.
Yes, that's another powerful technique. It's essentially learning to consciously apply a different concept or category to your raw bodily sensations, especially unpleasant ones.
Like reframing, but focused on the bodily feeling itself.
Precisely. It's about changing the meaning your brain makes of those physical signals. The book mentions how some contemplative traditions, like Buddhism, teach practices aimed at deconstructing suffering. You might learn to observe feelings of mental anguish, identify the underlying physical sensations, maybe heat, tension, pressure, and consciously recategorize them as just physical sensations, rather than letting the brain automatically categorize them as unbearable emotional pain.
Which might lessen their intensity or impact.
Potentially, yes. By changing the category, you change the meaning and consequently the experience. Practices like mindfulness meditation might help strengthen the brain networks involved in interoception and cognitive control, giving you more capacity to observe your internal state and choose how to categorize it rather than reacting automatically.
So you're essentially training your brain to use different recipes for the same basic bodily ingredients, giving you more flexibility in the final dish you experience.
That's a perfect way to summarize it. You're building a richer, more adaptable conceptual system. Your brain has more options for making meaning of your body budget fluctuations and the world around you. And the book gives that lovely, simple example, the cranky fairy.
Oh, right, for their daughter's tantrums.
Exactly. This sounds silly, but by creating this specific concept, the cranky fairy visited, and linking it to a concrete action, go to the Elmo chair until the fairy leaves, they were giving their daughter's brain a new tool, a new concept to help her categorize those intense, unpleasant feelings and body budget upheavals in a way that wasn't just overwhelming chaos. It helped her learn to manage those states by giving her a way to conceptualize and respond to them. She became a little architect of her own experience, using the concepts they provided.
That's really powerful. This constructed view also seems to offer totally new ways of thinking about mental and physical health issues.
Oh, absolutely. It reframes conditions like chronic pain, depression, and anxiety in a fascinating way. Take chronic pain, for instance, pain that lingers long after any initial injury should have healed.
Yeah, that affects so many people.
The book suggests it might not always be a signal of ongoing tissue damage. Instead, it could be understood as a kind of construction error or a misapplication of the concept pain. The brain, perhaps due to altered predictions or faulty interpretation of ambiguous body signals, keeps constructing the experience of pain even without a clear physical cause. It's like the prediction of pain becomes self-fulfilling.
And the placebo effect fits right into this, doesn't it? Believing a sugar pill will help actually reduce his pain.
Exactly. The placebo effect is a perfect demonstration of construction. Your brain's prediction that the treatment will work changes how it processes bodily signals and constructs the experience of pain. It highlights how powerful prediction and categorization are.
What about depression? How does this theory view it?
Depression is described potentially as a disorder of chronic misbudgeting. The brain seems stuck in a state of persistent physiological debt. To cope, it might drastically cut spending on non-essential activities.
Leading to symptoms like fatigue, lack of motivation, difficulty focusing.
Precisely. It might also become overly reliant on past negative predictions, getting stuck in loops based on previous bad experiences, making it hard to learn from new, potentially positive sensory input. The really important takeaway here is that depression isn't just a mental illness or a chemical imbalance. From this perspective, it's deeply intertwined with the body's energy regulation. It's neurological, metabolic, immunological.
So treatment needs to address the body budget too, not just thoughts or medication.
That's the implication. Simply trying to think positive or relying solely on medication might not be enough if the underlying body budget issues aren't addressed. Lifestyle factors like exercise, sleep, nutrition, managing chronic stress become absolutely critical for helping rebalance the body budget.
And anxiety, how might that fit in?
The book offers speculation here, suggesting anxiety might be characterized, in part, by the opposite problem to depression's rigid predictions. Maybe it involves too much prediction error, too many unsuccessful predictions. The brain struggles to effectively anticipate what's coming next, leading to a constant state of uncertainty.
And uncertainty itself is really taxing on the body budget, right?
Extremely. It keeps you in a state of high alert, which is metabolically costly. Weakened connections in those interoceptive and control networks might make it hard to generate accurate predictions or learn effectively from experience, leading the brain to constantly predict potential threats or just general ambiguity, which feels like anxiety.
It really hammers home that mind-body connection. It's not just a connection. They seem completely intertwined.
Absolutely. They are fundamentally inseparable in this view.
Yeah.
Chronic stress, things like childhood adversity or ongoing difficult relationships, these aren't just psychological burdens. They directly impact your body budget day after day. This can lead to chronic inflammation and significantly increase your risk over a lifetime for both physical diseases like heart disease or diabetes and mental illnesses.
But conversely, developing skills like emotional granularity, that might actually be protective.
That's the hopeful implication. By learning to categorize your feelings more precisely and manage your affect more effectively, you might become better at regulating your body budget. This could potentially buffer against the harmful effects of chronic stress and inflammation. Your body budget is constantly influenced by your life experiences, and your brain is constantly constructing your reality, including your health, based on signals from that budget.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. How does understanding constructed emotion and effective realism change how we navigate the social world, our interactions with others, even big systems like the law?
Well, remembering effective realism, that our feelings constantly color our perceptions, is huge for social interactions.
Yeah.
Think about it. If a colleague or friend seems suddenly sharp or withdrawn.
We usually take it personally. What did I do?
Right. But effective realism suggests pausing. Their unpleasant affect, their seeming grumpiness, might stem entirely from their internal state, their body budget being out of whack. Maybe they slept poorly or hungry, stressed about a deadline. It might have absolutely nothing to do with you. Their brain is just constructing their reality based on those internal signals.
That perspective could genuinely diffuse a lot of conflict and misunderstanding.
It really could. Now, think about the legal system. It often operates on assumptions rooted in that older classical view of emotion.
How so?
Well, it often assumes judges or jurors can be purely objective, rational observers, unaffected by their own feelings. It assumes emotions like fear or remorse or intent have clear, detectable fingerprints that can be objectively assessed. It often treats free will as simply the subjective feeling of being in control.
And this book argues those assumptions are flawed.
Deeply flawed. Effective realism means a juror's own feelings, biases, even their political beliefs, can subconsciously influence how they perceive supposedly objective evidence, like witness testimony or video footage. Does the person in the video look like they have violent intent? That perception is constructed, influenced by the juror's own concepts and effect.
That has massive implications for fairness and justice.
It really does. The law asks people to judge things like whether a defendant shows genuine remorse. But remorse, like any emotion, is constructed. It's perceived through categorization, influenced by cultural norms about how remorse should look, and it can potentially be faked or performed.
What about responsibility? If our actions are driven by predictions based on concepts we've learned, does that let people off the hook for bad behavior? My brain's predictions made me do it.
That's a critical question the book addresses directly. And the answer is no. It doesn't remove responsibility. Instead, it reframes it. Since your brain operates predictively, based on your past experiences and the concepts you hold, you have some responsibility for cultivating those concepts.
How does that work?
The book uses the analogy of drunk driving from the law. You're held responsible for harm caused while driving drunk, even if you felt out of control because you made the choice to drink and drive, knowing the foreseeable risks. It's about foreseeability. The book applies a similar logic to our concepts. If you cultivate and maintain harmful stereotypes, say racist or sexist concepts, your brain will use those concepts in its predictions. This might lead you to perceive threat where none exists, or misinterpret someone's actions based on the stereotype, potentially leading to harmful consequences. Even if the final action feels automatic or influenced by effective realism, the book argues there's culpability upstream, and the failure to change or override those harmful concepts you should have foreseen could lead to bad outcomes. It implies we have a moral responsibility to educate ourselves, challenge our biases, and actively cultivate better, more accurate concepts.
That's a really profound take on responsibility. One last area. How does this theory make us rethink animals? We tend to assume our pets feel emotions just like we do.
Yeah, that's a very common, very human thing to do. But this theory challenges that simple projection. It suggests that while animals absolutely experience affect, they feel pleasure, displeasure, arousal, calmness, their body budgets fluctuate, they likely don't construct complex human-like emotion categories. Primarily because they seem to lack this sophisticated conceptual system, particularly the abstract concepts enabled by human language that our brains use for categorization. They don't have words like disappointment or gratitude or schadenfreude to bundle together complex sets of situations, bodily feelings, and potential actions.
So when my dog looks guilty after chewing the furniture, he might not be feeling guilt in the human sense.
According to this perspective, probably not. He's likely experiencing unpleasant affect, maybe triggered by your tone of voice, your posture, his own past experiences of being scolded in similar situations, and exhibiting submissive behaviors that we as humans categorize using our concept of guilt. We're prone to what the book calls the mental inference fallacy, applying our complex mental state concepts onto beings that may not possess the machinery to construct those same states.
So the dog's experience might be more about simple affect and learned behavioral responses.
That's the more cautious interpretation based on this theory. The animal is certainly feeling something unpleasantness, maybe fear of consequence, and acting accordingly. But the rich, nuanced, concept-laden experience a human labels guilt might be specific to creatures with our kind of conceptual abilities.
So for now, the emotion we see in an animal might largely be our human interpretation or categorization, rather than reflecting their subjective reality of a specific emotion category.
That seems to be the conclusion the book points towards for most animals, while leaving open the possibility that some highly social animals with complex brains might have more rudimentary forms of goal-based concepts or simpler emotional categorizations than we currently understand. But it strongly advises against just assuming they feel things exactly the way we do.
Okay, this has been an incredibly deep dive. We've journeyed from challenging the old view to understanding this new construction process. Let's try to bring it all together. The classical view, the idea of universal triggered emotion fingerprints.
That just doesn't seem to hold up well against the scientific evidence presented in this work.
Instead, the science points towards this theory of constructed emotion. Your brain is actively building your emotional experiences in the moment.
Using basic ingredients like affect and interoception, constantly managing the body budget.
Its main tool is prediction, trying to anticipate what's next.
And it makes sense of everything by categorizing sensations and situations using concepts learned from experience, language, and culture.
Within the context of our shared social reality.
And variation is the name of the game. Each emotional instance is a unique construction.
And maybe the most powerful takeaway, the most empowering message from all this, is that sense of agency it gives back to us.
Right. You're not just passively reacting. You're an active participant, an architect of your own experience. You can't always control the feeling in the heat of the moment.
But you can influence the building blocks over time by becoming more aware of your body budget, understanding your brain's predictive nature, and consciously cultivating richer, more accurate concepts like improving your emotional granularity. You can learn, adapt, and become a more skillful architect.
It really shifts the whole focus. Instead of trying to fight or suppress supposedly fixed emotions, it's about understanding and influencing the construction process itself. And that has huge implications for our own well-being, our physical and mental health, how we relate to each other.
And even how we think about really big ideas like consciousness, free will, and responsibility.
Absolutely.
It definitely leaves you with a lot to think about. Here's a final thought to ponder. If our brains are constantly being wired by our experiences and our shared social reality shapes the very concepts we use to build our feelings and perceive the world, what responsibility does that give us? Not just for managing our own feelings and concepts.
But perhaps also for contributing to a social reality, a culture that provides better, more constructive concepts for everyone, especially for the next generation whose brains are learning those concepts right now.
That is definitely a question worth sitting with. This deep dive, as intense as it's been, has really only scratched the surface of the fascinating insights in this book.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more detail on the neuroscience, the development of concepts, the implications for law, medicine, everyday life. It's incredibly rich.
So we strongly, strongly encourage you, if this has sparked your interest, to delve deeper. Explore the full picture, the nuances, the evidence for yourself. The book is How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett.
It's definitely a challenging read in places, but profoundly rewarding. It will fundamentally change how you think about your own mind, your feelings, and really what it means to be human.
We'll put a link to the book in the description for you. Definitely check it out.